Today I'm speaking with Scott Okamoto. Scott, thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And Scott, for anyone that doesn't know, is a writer and a blogger and a musician from Los Angeles. And I've got a little bit of a longer bio here, so we'll go through it quickly and then hear more from you about other things we can know about you. But he is the author of a book that's coming out this week, April 18th, as of the time of this recording. April 18th. The book is called Asian American Apostate, Losing Religion and Finding Myself. There we go. Hold it up one more time.
Oh yeah.
Losing religion and finding myself at an evangelical university. And he lives. So I'll have the link, by the way, for the as soon as it's available on Amazon for
Yeah.
people to go pick it up. So please go check it out and read a copy. He lives in Pasadena, California, with his wife and three kids. And he attended the University of California in San Diego for a bachelor's in literature and writing, and the University of San Francisco for a master's in writing. And eventually, he did become involved with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, which we'll talk about in a little bit here. He also took a teaching job at Azusa Pacific University, which we'll talk about, I'm sure.
Yeah.
He is passionate about Asian American and Pacific Islander identity and politics, fly fishing, sex and sexuality. I'm working on some projects for that. We'll have to have you back for a topical one. Cooking and religious deconstruction, of course. He is also the creator and host of the Chapel Probation podcast, which we'll have a link for. And I did want to just mention one other thing for context for anyone that doesn't know. We're going to talk about a church called Lake Avenue Congregation Church. I did not know about it, so I did a little digging before the interview. And that church is a historic church from back in 1896, still going strong. As of 2010, which I know is a little dated, but they did have 298 churches at that point across the country. And for anyone that's kind of old school, been around listening to old school Christian radio, Ray Ortland Sr., he hosted the radio program The Haven of Rest. I used to listen to that every day for years growing up. He was a notable minister there. And as well, Paul Cedar came from there, former president of the Evangelical Free Church of America, and John Piper. Hate to bring his name up, but he was ordained at Lake Avenue Church. And the actual denomination that they are part of is called the Conservative Congregational Christian Conference. And I will have a link beneath our video for some of their position papers, which those of you who are interested, you might find it interesting to see what they stand for and what they stand against. They espouse, just again, reading some notes here, they espouse theologically conservative views. They oppose homosexuality, abortion, and non-marital sexual activity. And again, I'll have the links if you all want to go check that church out and what they stand for in that denomination. But that's what I know about you so far. Tell us more. Who is Scott Okamoto?
Yeah, you just scratched the surface there because some of the places I've been. But let's see. So I grew up at Lake Avenue. My parents they were culturally Christian in the early 70s. And when you come out of the incarceration camps of World War II, as my family did, both my parents um, were small babies, toddlers during World War II. Um, so their first few years were behind barbed wire in the middle of the desert. Um,
Here in the
as
U.S.?
kind of yeah, the Japanese incarceration camps. My dad
Mm.
was at Heart Mountain, my mom was at Gila River. Um, a lot of these families came out of these camps pretty shook, obviously, and really dug into their Americanness to sort of prove to their communities and to their neighborhoods that they were good Americans. And so one way to do that was to be Christian. So, a lot other families, I have friends whose families didn't do that and went harder into Buddhism or just no religion. But my family on my dad's side went into the Christian thing. But that was mostly cultural, just to be, patriotic and, we're good Christian Americans. They they got invited to a Bible study fellowship in the mid 70s, which is kind of like a parachurch organization. It just makes like they do a lot of homework and write a lot of notes about the Bible passage and talk about it. It seemed really boring to me. But suddenly, when I was a kid, maybe 7 years old, we were going to church and we went to Lake Avenue. And it was awesome. When you're seven, church is awesome. They give you some cookies and some juice and you sing some songs and they tell you about Jesus loves you. It's a good system because they got me. They got me and my brother were just we loved church. We loved growing up in it. And then as you get older, it gets more serious, commitment and sacrifice and you gotta witness to people. I learned how to play guitar so I could play like worship songs. Um, this was back in the day. Worship songs are tough now. You got to know like lots of chords. I'm a musician now, so I can play these chords. But back in the day, you just needed like three chords and you could play pretty much all of the the worship songs. Maybe a hymn or two. Um,
Was
so yeah.
was it a mega church back when you were growing up?
Well, I don't think they had the term. It was a lot smaller. There was, if you drive through Pasadena now on the 210 freeway, you see this huge church looming over the freeway at Lake at the Lake Avenue exit. That came in the early 90s. So before that, it was just a quaint, 1,000 seat sanctuary, old school wood, pews, pretty decent stage and a small organ off to the side. Um, so it felt like a huge thing, but yeah, it got exponentially larger as the years went on, and then they had to build the big. We called it the Sanctidome because it looks like yeah, it looks like something out of Vegas or something. But
Did you ever
it's
lead worship for either the big church or even youth group or anything like that?
I got to yeah, as a kid, I got to like be on the stage playing guitar with like the worship leader once in a while. They would have like a youth night. Um, so yeah, I felt all like cool, like Christian cred is on my podcast we have this term Christian cred. Like how Christian were you? Like, well, I was so Christian, I was leading worship or I was leading Bible studies or um yeah. So um yeah, but again, this is before it was the modern contemporary worship was just getting started in the 80s. There were still people at the church that didn't like guitars and drums and really uh, wanted to end that. But it was
Yeah.
happening. Yeah. Um,
In
so
terms of
also,
your, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
go ahead.
In terms of the church and its theology, I'm familiar again because of my experience with Ray Ortland and so forth. That there were things that they would stand for as the fundamentals. That obviously they're going to hopefully have some level of interest in communicating with Christians that have some second degree or second level differences. But the primary things were the primaries, and you had to agree on those, or we're going to not be able to have fellowship with you, and even your Christianity might be considered questionable. Do you recall any of those kind of strict fundamentals from that church growing up?
Hmm. Not so much as a kid. Um, and I feel like it probably got watered down when they got into the 90s and had the bigger because they became more of a seeker friendly. Was that what's the term?
Yeah, seeker
Seeker
sensitive.
friendly church? Yeah, it became because when they built the big sanctuary, they were like, "Oh, geez, we gotta fill these seats." So I feel like I remember the 80s where, people like Peter Wagner would preach in church and he started the whole crazy new apostolic reformation madness
Hmm.
when he was working at Fuller. There's a great series by on the Straight White American Jesus podcast detailing the history of this, and I was horrified because I was hired to edit and help do some music for that. And as I'm listening, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is where I was going." My parents had these books, so the 80s was sort of like probably the high points of all the fundamentalist, super high intensity Christianity. By the time they had the 90s, they had to pay off this, multi-million-dollar church and they needed more people. So they kind of went Christian light, I feel like. And so like, yeah, we're relatable Christians. We're cool. Oh look, we have a possibly a black person singing in church. Oh look, we have, this famous semi, B level CCM person singing, like, and so it became less about the fundamentalism and more about the sort of basic evangelical culture. Um,
Yeah, we need to grow the church. It feels too like and I was young in some of the time frames that some of these evolutions were occurring in churches, but it seemed like the whole Willow Creek and Bill
mm,
Hybels model just kind of people were like, if they can do it, why can't we do it? And what has he got that we don't? And I know it's the story's changed a little bit since then, since his departure, but it seemed like there was a lot, even in Bible college when I went to Lancaster Bible College in Pennsylvania, they were talking about the Willow Creek model and how important it was to at least, even if you didn't want to adopt all their theological positions, understand what they're doing to make their church grow. And I
yeah.
mean, if the ultimate goal is to bring in the lost sheep, then you're going to want to know how they do it.
Yeah, it became a numbers game, right? And in doing so, I feel like that's where evangelical Christianity started to sort of separate itself from theology, because previous to that, each tradition, each denomination had very rigorous and strict guidelines as to what they believed, how they read the Bible, what the gospel meant. Um, and I feel like since then, the Willow Creek model and the development of megachurches, it just became like, yeah, love and Jesus and come drink at our Starbucks and wear our merchandise and with this, church mug and it became like an identity more than a theology. So yeah, that's
It
my
seemed
that's my unacademic assessment of the 90s
it
evangelicals.
it seemed to like a lot of churches, I think, were becoming at least somewhat aware that some other kinds of churches that were more traditional had been insensitive and hurt people, and there was, the
Mm,
beginnings of religious trauma, if not as the actual phrase, just that concept. And I think a lot of churches are trying to say, like, look, we're here to be your home. We're here to be not they wouldn't have probably said it so, but we're here to be, the hospital that helps you heal from the other hospitals, the churches that didn't heal you were different, and you're not
yeah,
going to, you're used to hearing churches argue about the color of the carpet, or if we're King James only, we're here to
yeah,
just be your friend. We love you and we're so glad you're here. And
yeah,
we don't want you to feel threatened in any way. And
right.
in some ways, there's obviously some good aspects to that, but it definitely, I think, waters down the theology at that point because once you invite everybody in, then there's going to be people that are going to be offended about stuff like I'm sure get into, such as gender roles and
Yeah.
gender equality and things like that. And eventually, you have to water something down, or you're going to start offending people again.
Yeah, and the watered down part, I feel like it's like a lot of cults where they seem welcoming, but once you get in, you realize there are absolutely parameters that you have to follow, that you can't cross these lines, otherwise you're in big trouble. And so, they're not necessarily written down, other than things like homosexuality or basic sexuality or roles of women. Lake Avenue for all of its progress, still they would never have a woman be head pastor. I think that might actually be written down, but
Yeah, I
yeah, it's
think
just not
so.
going to happen. They wouldn't even for until like the 90s, they wouldn't even have a woman on the pastoral staff. It was if someone was leading the kids ministry, she was known as like the director of children's ministry. She was never the children's pastor. Yeah, so it's still really crappy. It's just repackaged to bring people in and then hammer them with the usual fundamentalist stuff. Yeah.
So as you're there at the church, was that where you first got presented with the gospel, and how did your official, internal accepting Christ occur?
Let's see. You do it a lot of times in your youth. I remember I prayed with my parents, the prayer, accept Jesus in your heart. Yeah, you're a Christian. And then I remember maybe in like junior high or middle school, being at a camp. Are you sure you did it? So, I went out and did the altar call and just in case, it doesn't hurt to do it again. And then um maybe once or twice again in high school. 'Cause, you hear a different speaker who's got a different angle or a different approach to the gospel and you go, oh, well, yeah, I better sign up under this one too, just in case. So yeah, I got saved a few times. Um, it's like having double insurance or something, right? It's so yeah. So the gospel was, Jesus died for your sins. Oh, so I did like a campus crusade had like a high school program that found its way into my high school, and it was a secular, it was a public school, but they let these people on campus, and of course I went because I was a good Christian. And I don't know if you're familiar with those four spiritual law tracks.
Yeah.
I don't even remember three and four. Law number one, God loves you, has a plan for your life. Number two, God, you're sinful. Something. Anyway, there's four things, and that end up to me being like a pretty good summary of the gospel. We're sinful, need Jesus, pray the prayer, accept him in your heart, and then you can go to heaven. So
Hmm.
that was sort of the simplest distillation of the gospel.
At what age would you say that when you looked back at that, what was the age at which you were absolutely sure that you were in a right relationship with God, where it was like, there's no more doubts that I'm definitely trusting this. I know I'm a sinner and I know he's my savior, not just the savior, he's my savior.
Yeah, I was pretty sure every time,
Okay.
each of the times, it was like, okay, this is the one. Yeah, got it. And then you'd hear something else, and oh, I better do it again. So, and I was baptized. I think I was in junior high, maybe 12 or 13.
Okay.
Um, which is supposed to be sort of like a extra heaping of confirmation. Yeah, I remember feeling bad because I got water up we did the full dunking, what's it called? Immersion?
Yep.
Not a dunk tank. We called it the dunk tank.
Yeah. You gotta
The,
gotta gotta do the whole death and resurrection
yeah, I was
illustration.
sort of hoping they would just sprinkle the water but no, we put the robes on. They had a dunk tank in the small they call it the chapel, the former sanctuary. And so they would roll back this part of the stage, and my junior high pastor, who's a good friend, dunked me. And I felt bad because water went in my nose, and I was trying so hard not to cough to ruin the moment. So I was just suffering, holding it in while he lifted me out and prayed this prayer, his hand on my head. And then as soon as I got off the stage, I was just like, um, I held it in for Jesus. That's how committed I was, my eyes were watering, but I didn't let it show because I didn't want to make Jesus look bad. This is supposed to be a special moment.
That's awesome. I remember I had the same thing. I remember I had just learned about how electricity and water can be deadly. And I remember
Yeah,
thinking there's a microphone like 3 inches away from, like, because the
right.
pastor's speaking, and I was like, I sure hope that microphone doesn't fall into the water.
Or to get splashed.
Yeah. Yep. And then the white robes are see-through, so it's like, it was very embarrassing.
Oh, see,
But
they did good on that. They were very thick, so they
okay,
weren't see through for ours. Lake Avenue had money, so we had
the
to give
good
them
stuff.
back. But yeah, it was like curtains. It was very, yeah. You could drown in these robes if yeah.
Well, when you once you were definitely a Christian and trying to live your life for the Lord, what would you say? What was your life like? And I know we're diverging a little bit from your book, and I want to get to that shortly, but
Now it's all related. Yeah.
definitely all related. Um, when you're trying to live for the Lord, what was your daily life like, and just what was the deepest passions, of your heart as a young Christian?
Yeah, I was all in. I was the kid who would tell his friends um about church, about Jesus. I would even talk to my teachers. I was that kid. I I remember a sermon where the pastor was talking about being fearless for God. The real fruit of the spirit comes when you are 100% in, and no compromise. And so I took that to heart. And so uh I was, even though most of my friends weren't Christian, I was lucky. I guess I was nice enough that I had friends who weren't Christian and they accepted me. But I was always bugging them about, Jesus and being saved. And um funny story, when I finally was not Christian, I ended up writing to most of my childhood friends and apologizing for being such a pain. And they were cool about it. They're like, we knew it came from a good place, and you were a good person, so they put up with it. So I was that kid. If a teacher said something that sounded like it was contrary to what I thought the Bible said, or what Jesus was about, I would raise my hand. I'd be like, so yeah, the Bible says this. So, just so you know. And
That's awesome. I was the same exact way. I mean, you have to. I mean, what else
right?
matters?
If your faith is in the balance, which I thought it was, yeah, you got to do these things. There's no compromise, no fear. because you think there's angels or whatever bolstering you. The Holy Spirit is there flowing through you like the Force, right? It's yeah. So yeah, I was all in.
Mm.
I really believed. I believed it, and I professed it. Um, Even in high school, I remember this one kid made the mistake of asking me about Christianity, and we were rehearsing for marching band, a field show, and it was like a Wednesday night rehearsal, and so during a break that it's pretty tiring. You're marching around and trying to figure out where you're going and playing music. We would have these like 5-10 minute breaks, and I pulled out, of course, I had it with me, Four Spiritual Laws in my pocket, and I started reading it to her, and my whole woodwind section saw me talking and came over and sat down just to listen to what I was saying. And so I'm standing there in the middle of this football field with most of the woodwind section listening to me do the four spiritual laws, and I just felt all puffed up. This to me was confirmation that the Holy Spirit was working through me, and I'm preaching the gospel to, a few dozen woodwind players who were just wondering what the hell I was doing. But um yeah, it was like I was just constantly, it was like spotlight theory, right? You look for confirmation of what you're doing, that some sign from God that you're doing the right thing. Um
Mm.
but
But
it's an embarrassing story now, but that's
well, it really just shows too that that sometimes the objection is thrown against people like yourself and me that you aren't really in this and you aren't really Christians, or if it was
yeah,
cultural. And it's like when you look back at your life, and number one, of course, just the private time that we had with the Lord, of like, we wanted the word of God. We didn't want the Bible in some just purely intellectual sense. We looked at it as a love letter from our Lord and Savior.
yeah,
And we didn't want just the Bible. We wanted the author of the Bible. We wanted God. And then secondarily, the idea
yeah,
that what could be more important in life than sharing the gospel and enlarging the kingdom, not
yeah,
in a purely numbers game thing, but just saying, I want you to experience what you were created for, which is to be in a right relationship with your creator and to flourish. Your life can never be better than when you are in an intimate relationship with the person who did everything to redeem you from sin. And it really is amazing to me, like you're saying, just how much you just wanted to, because even at a point where it was inappropriate, I did the same thing where I'd be talking to other small children on the playground near my house, and it's like some of them were Catholics. I was like, Catholics aren't going to heaven. You
oh
guys
shit.
have the wrongs. You guys pray to Mary, this, and here I
Yeah,
was, causing trouble,
yeah,
hurting these little children with these messages because I was proselytized too as a young child as well.
yeah, same. Which is amazing because Catholics were, you know, before us, before the Protestants,
Yeah.
by quite a lot of time. Um, yeah. And then for me, there's a race element. As I looked back, I didn't see it at the time, but I was a Japanese American kid in an all white school and in a predominantly white church. And I just wanted acceptance. I knew I was different than most of the people around me, and I had to I use the term, I had to outwhite the white folks in every aspect of my life. Um, in baseball, I played baseball. I had to be better than my peers. And then when I played guitar, I had to shred like Eddie Van Halen because I couldn't just be a okay guitar player. I had to I had I, so equal amount of time praying and reading the Bible was spent, just figuring out, and I saw it all under the umbrella of using God's talents to their fullest potential. I think I told myself that. But really, I just was subconsciously aware that I was on the fringes and on the margins of my community, and I had to do extra to stand out. So I was going to be a better Christian than my peers. I was going to be, better at everything. Um, I didn't see that at the time, but um, it by the time I was in college, I realized what I was doing. Because I was still doing it in college and joined InterVarsity leadership, worship team. People looked up to me, and I was like, really, I was just puffing myself up with credibility. Um, and every time I changed perspective, so in church we're taught, gay in the 80s especially, um, gay people are evil, depraved, trying to destroy the American family. That's what Dobson was always pushing. Oh, fun fact, I grew up 6 houses up from James Dobson.
Wow,
Um, yeah, knew the man. My parents knew him. I knew his kids. Um,
that's
then they
crazy.
moved to Colorado Springs in the 80s. But
Hmm.
yeah. So we had all his books, and then my parents still got his newsletter. So I would read the newsletter. Gay people are depraved, destroying the church and trying to destroy our Christianity. And then I meet gay people in college, and it's just like, uh, they're just people. And then I shift my theology. God loves gay people. Oh yeah, he's always yeah, that duh. God loves, and every time I had a shift in perspective, God changed with it. Even though previous to that moment, I was 100% sure God hated gay people and wanted to strike them dead and protect me from them. And so every step of development of my theology, I realized God was changing too. Or and it's like, well, is this me or is this God that I'm worshiping? Because it quickly became clear that it was me. It was like my projection of my values, my understanding of the Bible shaped how I saw God. And after like the 10th or 12th time it shifted dramatically, is when I started to look back and piece it together like, wow, every stage of development was me changing and then changing the God that I believed in. So there was several different versions of God. And so by the time I got to version 10.2, it was like, there's a pattern here. there's there's this
Hmm.
this might be more me than whatever I assume God to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I ask to dive a little bit into the issue of the racism you mentioned? And I know we probably touched on this a little bit as we dig into your book a little bit, but what did that look like? I know, like we talked earlier, that the church was probably you went to was unlikely to ever have a woman be a pastor,
Yep.
um, and that was like an official stance, like biblically, that's not going to happen.
Right.
But in terms of just culturally, what how did you see the racism come out both for yourself and for other races? Like, what were the things that you just doors you just could not ever break through that you would have at that point as a Christian wanted to break through? Or how did they make that journey harder for you?
Yeah. It was subtle because, the message is always we're all God's people. Um, the 80s was the beginning of sort of what we understand to be diversity. Um, but it wasn't until later I realized diversity just means white-centeredness that welcomes people around them that are different. The BIPOC folks are never going to be centered. Um, and so just culturally growing up in the church, I did well. And people, I could be on the stage playing guitar, but I always knew that like the cool white kids were never going to accept me. I was never going to be part of the cool kids. And that was at school and at church. And that's why my parents instilled in me this, work stereotypical work ethic of, well, then work harder, to overcome that. And so I did. And then it wasn't until later again that I realized why do I have to work twice as hard to get, half the recognition or half of the rewards of the work, just because I live in this culture. And the funny thing is I'm a fourth generation, so I'm not even an immigrant, or my parents aren't even immigrants. My grandparents aren't even immigrants, but I grew up feeling like an immigrant. um,
Hmm.
and yeah, so the church definitely reinforced that idea that I was different. Um, Now there were great people, and there were people who cared about me. So I'm not saying it's not like it was like burning crosses on our lawn, but it was subtle. It was just this sort of um microaggressions comes to mind, just like things that reinforce that you're different. Yeah, you might be able to play guitar, but yeah, you're not going to be the worship leader, or you're never going to be the pastor. Um,
Mm. Can
But
I ask?
as long as you're one of the good ones, we'll let you be here and play these, auxiliary roles.
I was gonna make a quick comment and then ask a question.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the name Francis Chan?
Oh yeah. He's
I was never really under his ministry, so I can't really speak to what he believed and so forth. But I do
yeah.
remember seeing his popularity grow at a certain point. And again, he wasn't really part of my circle. But I remember that impression of like, this is different. Like, I don't see that many um,
Yeah.
Asian men in high levels of leadership. But my
Yeah.
question was going to be, did you ever get the sense that people of different cultures were tending to see that inherent racism and needing to, I mean, maybe it's getting fed up with it enough to say we need to start our own church. And what I mean by that is, like, I'm here in Atlanta, when I look around, there's a lot of Korean churches where they might
hmm
agree with the church down the street theologically, but they want a Korean church. So obviously
Yeah.
linguistics is going to come into it. They want to be able to speak, Korean, not English.
Yeah.
But was there ever a pressure to say, why don't you go to a church with Asian people or
Yeah.
Japanese people? And did you see that even with people of other races? Because I remember even at Bible college, the head of our, I mean, even at Bible college, the head of our pastoral department, he said something like, and he may have been quoting someone else, but he said, Sunday is one of the least diverse days of the
Yeah.
week. And
Most
it really is
segregated
true.
days of the week. Yeah, I heard
Yeah.
that too.
And it's like, if that's true, why didn't the church try to fix it as opposed to being like, oh, okay, well, you know, just you keep going to your predominantly black church, you keep going to your predominantly white church, and you keep going to your predominantly Korean church. And there didn't seem to be much effort to bring them together. Like, how do those pressures affect you?
Yeah, I wanted to be in the white church. There were Asian American churches. One of my dad's friends growing up became the pastor of one of the biggest Asian American churches in the area. And I didn't hate them or anything, but I just felt like I felt like this is so embarrassing. I felt like being at Lake Avenue was like the big leagues, you know, where the white folks and the black folks and it's somewhat had some diversity. I felt like being in any place that was monolithic was like the easy way to do it. So as much as I complain about having to work extra hard to fit in, I felt like that was my job. That was I was called to do this. And really it's just ego or lack of ego. So in the case of Francis Chan, like he comes later. Francis Chan would have never existed in the 80s or even the 90s, I don't think, early 90s. Francis Chan, he spoke at APU a lot. He was like one of the favorite speakers. There's this trope in literature we call like the magical Negro, where like there's this, or in film too, where you have a black character that's like seen as having some kind of supernatural powers for good. Um, and Francis Chan kind of played that role as the magical Asian. He would be the first to make Asian jokes. So he does this thing where he puts non-Asians at ease. He doesn't even believe in diversity and he doesn't talk about racism. He'll tell you flat out racism doesn't exist, or if it does, it doesn't matter. So he puts white people at ease. So he's not gonna make them feel bad for racism. He's not gonna bring up the past and not make them uncomfortable. Like I said, he'll tell Asian jokes. He said to APU Chapel once that he never liked Asian girls because they remind him of his sister. He said this in a chapel talk,
Hmm.
which was really hurtful. White people don't say that. White people don't go, I don't like white girls. They remind me of my sister. It's a completely white-centered perspective. When non-white people say this, I've heard black people say this. I've heard Hispanic people say this. Your mind is completely colonized by whiteness if you say this, because you'll never hear a white person say, I don't like white girls or I don't like white men. They remind me of whatever. Um, so that's how someone like Francis Chan can sort of play this minstrel character and be sort of catapulted to this status of magical Asian person, that because it makes non-Asian people feel like, oh, see, we have diversity. I like Francis Chan. I read his books and and he's like a powerful speaker. Now, if you really look at what he says, it's kind of ridiculous. Like we've done Francis Chan's studies, and we've broken down some of his sermons, and wow, they don't make a lot of sense. Even when I was a Christian, I didn't like his chapel talks because they're just
Mm,
all over the place. There's not it's not grounded in anything theological. It's purely like bells and whistles and smoke and mirrors to with this like big reveal at the end and see how amazing God is. And it could be something like, and the candle stayed lit. So therefore, big theological proclamation. And it's just like, you just pulled that out your butt, man. Like where what
mm.
how did you get it? So yeah.
It's like that.
It-
Have you seen the laminin presentation? The laminin in the
no.
shape of a cross.
Oh,
I don't think it was Francis Chan, but it's one of the other more progressive pastors. There's some chemical in your body that you can, at a certain angle, if you twist the picture just right, it kind of looks like a twisted cross. And they're like, see, the cross is woven into our genes or DNA or something. And it
in
was like,
there.
yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, so sorry, I could go on and on about Francis Chan or James Dobson or
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna piggyback off the James Dobson thing real quick and say, I didn't I didn't know him, of course, and I was on the other side of the country, but my dad had been working very closely with Jerry Falwell, and so if you're familiar with that name, he'd
oh
even
yeah.
driven buses for him to bring the people from the surrounding communities into the church. And so I kind of grew up seeing Jerry Falwell on the TV a lot because even though they'd moved away from Virginia, at that point I grew up near Philly. Um, it was like that connection was important for my dad because since he'd worked for Jerry Falwell. And I realized later, like Jerry Falwell was a big part of this too, with the I think it was the Christian Coalition or something like that. And
Yep.
they were really sending these messages of the whole us versus them, and this is a culture war, and you need to really shelter your kids, ultra homeschool if you can, and keep them away from all the other people because they're going to send them to hell pretty much.
Yeah, and there was a racial component too, keep your good white kids away from the black kids. There was all kinds of there were layers to that,
Yeah, to my shame, I did spend a year at Bob Jones University, so that definitely
Ah,
came into
I
the
have a whole
equation.
episode in Chapel Formation on Bob Jones, so I
Really,
know. Oh, yeah.
it's funny. I was tracking some of the news with Bob Jones over the years since I went there, and one of the President Bushes that was running and was speaking all over
Yeah.
in the candidacy, he went there and spoke. And
Yeah.
apparently, like right after he had spoken, the news outlets picked up that Bob Jones was against interracial dating.
Yep.
And so this policy that had been there forever,
Yep.
and it was just so important, it was like a cultural pillar to them, they suddenly dropped it just because they wanted to be associated with President Bush. And
Yeah.
they didn't want him to drop their support of Bob Jones. So they suddenly switched gears. Oh, you can interracial date. We're okay with it. It's like what happened with Ham and the curse of Ham and the Tower of Babel and Noah's flood. These things were separated by God on purpose. Don't unseparate them. God wants us separated, and all of a sudden it's like, no, we'll move past it now. It's like the Catholic Church where things that were anathema before are suddenly acceptable. It's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, because churches have to stay and places like Bob Jones have to, it comes down to money, right? If they don't adapt to the times, then they're going to go out of business. And so, um, yeah, money ends up trumping any kind of theology or religious belief.
Hmm. By the way, did you have any siblings?
I have a brother, yeah, a younger brother.
Okay.
Similar trajectory as my own. He's an attorney now and also has deconstructed. So
Hmm.
it makes,
Interesting.
Christmas dinner and Easter. Like we just had Easter. My poor parents. They wanted us to they really believed in, and they still do, in that, you love the Lord with all your heart, soul, and they always emphasize mind, really interrogate your faith, thinking that would make us stronger in our faith. And it really just made us think our way out of the faith. Um, so yeah, they still go to Lake Avenue and they're still very involved and yeah.
Hmm. Well, in terms of your trajectory, I know we've talked about Azusa Pacific a little bit, but could you take us into the part of the story where the early seeds of your deconversion were planted, and just what were some of the things that crossed your mind? I know we've talked a little about racism and some of that, but if that became a snowball effect, or if there's other things, like what were the seeds that I think a lot of us would say they weren't at the time things we would have thought of as this will lead to deconversion. It was just, an issue to
Yeah.
explore and figure out where you stood. But what were all
Yeah.
those seeds that eventually did become an issue?
Yeah, they were each steps along the way. And weirdly, I don't think racism was one of them. Because there's racism everywhere. Um, I would have accepted Christianity with all of its racism, and I would probably just ended up at a BIPOC or Asian American church. For me, it was the breakdown of the Bible, and how if that's our one book or books, the Bible kind of eats itself. It's contradictory. It's not accurate historically or scientifically. Um, and so I had questions when I was young about how that worked that never got answered. And each stage of my development, there were more questions, and they were never, the answer was always like, well, you have to ask God when you get to heaven, or these things don't matter. The gospel matters, and so I would always follow that, and just until there was so many things that I just couldn't. So I look at in the book, each chapter of my book starts with a flashback of deconstruction, like an example or a moment. Like I remember one Christmas service, which I loved Christmas service. It was like, oh, let's open to the second chapter of Luke. And the pastor would always act like, yeah, let's do Luke this year. And then I noticed like 5 years in a row, I was like, let's open to the second chapter. Like, well, why aren't we doing any of the other gospels on Christmas? And then I looked it up and it's like, well, there are no Christmas stories in the other gospels. If it's so damn important, like why isn't if the birth of Jesus is this seminal moment of our faith and this culmination of supposedly all these prophecies, why isn't it done the same way in the other gospels? And there was no answer to that. And then, when you start to really dig into it, I started reading like Bart Ehrman books and how the Bible was put together and who actually wrote these books. Um, it's like, wow. So this is all we have to guide our faith, other than I think that's why they came up with this Holy Spirit thing, because it was like clearly the text is not going to be that helpful. So we have to have this other component that instills something inside of us that because that's what my dad will say when I was going through my deconstruction, I would hit him with all these things. He's like, yeah, he's like, I don't have answers to that, but I know the Holy Spirit inside me, he tells me this is the truth. I'm like, yeah, but it changes. I had Holy Spirit telling me all kinds of stuff that ended up not being true or that ended up shifting. If it's really that malleable of faith, and then you look at all the hundreds of denominations, each with their own, they're very clear about what they believe and don't believe, and they disagree with each other. And some of them are really big things, like does the Holy Spirit even exist, or creeds, or was Jesus actually divine or not? There's all these different beliefs under the umbrella of Christianity, and so the mental gymnastics of it all just was just you could do it. I have friends who are very strong Christians, and they do the mental gymnastics, and they're smarter than I am. So I'm like, if you have to have an IQ of like 180 to really understand and get through the Bible, and then humanity's doomed. There's no way the average Trump supporting person is gonna like intellectually grapple with all of this history, culture, anthropology, science, to make the Bible make sense, and then to bring that Bible into the 21st century to apply to us. There's no science in the Bible. There's so many things that we have today that they couldn't have even imagine when the Bible was written, and yet we're going to go to that as the source for our day-to-day lives. Is like, no, that doesn't make any like our U.S. Constitution barely makes sense, and that's only a couple hundred years old. It's like, yeah. So it was
Hmm.
the deconstruction. Each point of deconstruction to me was less about the treatment, because I was I could work with the racism, I could work with the xenophobia and homophobia. Like that's just I just saw that as human brokenness that needed to be overcome by Jesus, and I was ready for it. I would have spent a whole life engaged in that but to me, it was just like the breakdown of the Bible and faith and all the various factors.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like you mentioned the idea of, you'll get answers in heaven. It almost seemed like for a lot of us, there was this sense of like, if you can acknowledge that some of these things don't seem to make sense,
Yeah.
but still bow your knee, you
Yeah.
actually kind of get to a spiritual level where you're embracing uh, the mystery and the paradox. I remember I was heavily influenced by a singer named Michael Card, and he talked about the whole idea, and I think it's First Corinthians, in his songs about being a fool, like what seems like foolishness to the world is actually wisdom with God. So come be a fool,
Yeah.
in quotes. But the paradox is you're actually choosing the path of wisdom. And it almost seemed like if you can hold this intention and just it kind of mentally, emotionally say, God, I'm not here to try to be the answer man. I'm not
Mm.
here to try to figure it all out. I am here to kind of like Job said, put my hand over my mouth and just listen. Let you be God. You speak. You're the God who controls it all. You're the God who defeated Leviathan and all that. You are the God of the universe. I am but dust and ashes. And then you get even in Romans 11 where people are arguing about election, and people are saying Paul's anticipating their arguments, and it's he's one of them. He says, people kind of shake their fists and say, God, why did you make me this way? Why did you make me a vessel fit for destruction? And the answer is, he doesn't even answer it. He just says, will the thing formed, which is the word in Greek plasma, will the thing formed say to the maker, why did you make me this way? Like would the pot, the clay pot, yell at the potter and say, why are you making me into a bowl and not a, something else? And it's like the potter has the right to do this. And when you stand in God's presence and say, God, I demand answers, you're
Yeah.
completely usurping God. And
Yeah.
the spiritual path is to say, I will not do that to God.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul, for comparing us to inanimate objects. Um, that it all makes sense why God didn't want, Adam and Eve to eat of the tree of fruit of knowledge, right? of um so if we're just supposed to be a pot with a singular purpose in on this earth, then yeah, and if you're okay with that, and interestingly, the friends that I have who are Christian, would push back on a lot of levels to those, especially Paul's passages. Um, Paul has almost become more important than Jesus in today's evangelical culture.
For sure.
So, they'll follow Paul to a T, but oh, when Jesus said this about money, you have to contextualize that. When he says, don't save, or don't get divorced, or it's like, well, really, what he meant was, but Paul, yeah, you just got to follow Paul.
Yeah. With no discussion of whether or not we actually believe that some of
Yeah,
the books are actually written by Paul or someone
right.
else. It's crazy. I did want to ask in terms of your time at Azusa Pacific, that's a Christian college for anyone that doesn't know about it. What do they stand for? Like for anyone that doesn't know Azusa Pacific, what do they stand for? What are they all about? And what were you doing there? And what happened in your experience there over the years as you were teaching?
Yeah, because at this point in the conversation, people are probably wondering, what in the world were you doing at a place like that? Well, it's a conservative evangelical university. It's accredited. They get Title IX exemptions, so they can still discriminate against whoever they want for religious freedom. That's mostly LGBTQIA folks, and women. Um, when I was still I was still calling myself a Christian in the late 90s. I was teaching at a couple of community colleges, trying to get my teaching career going in English. And a family friend told me they were hiring at Azusa Pacific. And I had thumbed my nose at Azusa when I was a kid because in the late 80s, when I was applying to college, it was known as kind of a Christian party school. It was like where the conservative kids went to sow their oats before they became like youth pastors or something. So, um, it was not a well known academic institution, but
Hmm.
at all. And so,
Can I jump in and
uh,
ask you a quick question? Could you
yeah,
clarify when you said in the 90s I would have still called myself a Christian?
yeah,
Do you mean that in the sense of I would have publicly said it, but I was
yeah,
deconstructing, or just that?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
exactly that. I was when I was in my master's program in grad school in San Francisco, hanging out with, transgender people and LGBTQI of all sorts and all kinds of interesting people. I was known as the cool Christian, because I made it known, I still kind of held to that thing where, you're gonna be gotta be loud and proud about your faith. It's even though it was fading quickly.
Hmm.
Life experiences were really stripping away most of, my religious beliefs and practices. Um, but
But you would have
when
still said in terms of your salvation the same thing you'd said years
yeah,
ago. You're
I
you're a
did.
sinner, Christ is my savior, and I do believe.
Yeah, I would have probably avoided the sinner talk. But I think I still believed in everything as far as the gospel, like the that we are broken and we need Jesus. And I was in my mid to late 20s.
Gotcha.
Um, Although if you really pinned me down, and some of my friends did, I didn't have a lot of answers to be able to defend it. It's just when you grow up in it, it's so inextricably tied with your identity, right? It's when you grow up in in that kind of setting, it runs deep. And so the deconstruction process was a nice long um yeah, journey. So by the time I applied to teach English at Azusa, I was barely hanging on. I was like, I figured I'll teach here a couple semesters, get some experience at a, university. I always put quotes up when I say that for that school. Um, but they don't have it. They didn't have any other non-white. I think there was one other non-white adjunct. Um, I'm a relatable person, so I did well. My students wrote glowing reviews of my classes, except for the ones that were mortally offended by my perspective, and there were a few. But by and large, 85-90% of my students loved taking my classes. Um, so I kept getting promoted and I kept getting more classes. Um,
When you talk
and
about getting a couple years under your belt,
yeah,
it sounds like from an outsider's perspective that there were there was like a battle going on behind the scenes in your mind and your heart. Is that fair to
yeah,
say?
yeah, absolutely.
How did you just deal with the emotions of that?
I was hoping that coming to a place that called itself a flagship evangelical university, if I was gonna ever find footing and stop deconstructing, it would be at a place like that. This is the ivory tower chunk branch of evangelical culture. This is where all the answers should be. And really, I got all the same, you know, I enjoyed talking to my colleagues in biblical studies and theology and even English, but they didn't have any deeper answers than I had been given from Sunday school teachers when it came to faith. They could speak, a lot of them had PhDs from, real schools, and they could speak as experts on, their field of study. But as soon as you start asking the basic questions about faith, they would resort to the same trite sayings that, had grown up with.
Yeah,
I
the
remember I
party
was in
line.
a car, we were driving to a conference or something with a couple of my colleagues in English and a couple of people from biblical studies. And I brought up intersex people. If God is God and he doesn't make mistakes, how do you explain people born with two sets of sexual organs? Is that a mistake or is that part of his design? Because if it's part of his design, then he creates diversity. And you can't hit me with this, marriages between man and woman, all these very stark binary definitions. And the car erupted into this cacophony of just really insipid, like these highly educated, intelligent human beings were reduced to like children in a matter of seconds, just trying to talk over and none of them had anything intelligent to say about it. They couldn't. My perspective was, well, I don't mind this. This is an interesting topic to chew on, but I think they felt the moment that, oh, I need to have an answer to this, a definitive, confident answer. And they had nothing. They could not even begin to form rational thoughts on that topic, and it just blew their minds. I think I ruined some of their conference experiences because they were still thinking about it when they were presenting their papers.
Hmm.
So think little grenades like that you throw into a conversation. It, in my view, it was like, well, this shouldn't be a deal breaker. This is an interesting wrinkle of faith, like unanswerable questions, add that to the list of things we already don't understand. But to them, it was like, as to an evangelical mind, you have to have answers. You have to be certainty is a fruit of the spirit kind of thing. Like you can't have questions, you gotta have absolute confidence in your faith and how that faith works in this world. And that's where it just falls apart. And, it's like the Christians that I hang out with are the ones that embrace um, ambiguity and confusion and the mysteries of the world. So so yeah, I was there and it, it felt like being in church again. Like
Hmm.
science teachers don't believe in science. Film teachers don't let their students see anything with nudity in it. They're usually okay with violence, but it's just it was like Sunday school on acid. In the English department, to its credit, it's an accredited school, so we taught Shakespeare and I taught all kinds of things, and they would defend it. Parents would complain. Parents would pull their kids out, if they found out their kid took Shakespeare and heard something, controversial.
Hmm.
But by and large, so there were good pockets of people who were approaching their job in good faith to say, this is an accredited university. We're promising the students an education that, they can go to grad school. But man, that was not the whole school. There were pockets of, you could go through and get a good education if you had the right professors, or you could go through and just basically have Sunday school and learn almost nothing
Hmm.
academically.
While we're on that topic, the story you're just sharing, how would they generally treat homosexuality in your experience?
They didn't. Um,
Like they just ignored it?
yeah, it was like a don't ask, don't tell. I mean,
Okay.
Chapel would have speakers decry homosexuality and say, it's a sickness that can be cured. That was if the school had a stance and it didn't. I mean, they had rules. You can't be gay. They kicked people out for being gay. They fired professors for finding out they're gay. But other than that, there was not much theology behind it. They would just say, we follow the Bible, and so no gay,
Hmm.
no homo and
But they weren't actively like mocking or belittling people as
on
far
an
as you're aware?
official level, no. On an individual level, absolutely. Like in
Okay.
my podcast, I have a couple of guests who went through APU as gay students, and it was awful. The things that they heard professors say. There were psychology professors that would say that gay people are child molesters, just flat out.
Hmm.
These are educated people with PhDs, saying I would never let my child anywhere near a homosexual because, they'll get raped and
Hmm.
groomed and be forced into being gay. And um, so the school was like what I write in my book is, bad things can be said, racism can be in any setting or homophobia. It's just that it's welcome at APU. It's not it's not a deal breaker to express these horrible things. You're all part of the family of God there. So racists are welcome, homophobes are welcome.
Hmm.
Even progressive Christians are tolerated, but they're definitely pushed back against. So they'll push back against the liberation theologist or the post-colonial theologist, but there's very little pushback against any, racism or homophobia.
Hmm. Did you happen to be there during the Donald Trump presidency?
Now, thankfully, I got out right before that. Um, Interestingly, the Obama presidency was one of the more fascinating times. I remember 2004 when Bush won re-election. The campus was like a party. People were running up and down with banners on the main student walk, cheering, high-fiving. God won was the thing my students would say. And then in 2008, when Obama won,
God's
it was,
lost.
oh my gosh, it was like a funeral on campus. It was so funny. Like those of us on the left, um, very few of us would smile and nod at each other and give each other the thumbs up, and just students were crying. They were talking about how they wished Obama would die, and um, they were saying the N word.
That's awful.
It was it was terrible. It was like even I have friends who are Christians, and they maybe didn't vote for Obama, but they recognized the historic moment for the country that a non-white person named Barack Hussein Obama was elected president. They recognize they didn't like him, they didn't agree with his politics, but they were willing to say, well, this is a big moment for us. That did not happen by and large at places like APU, not just APU. It was just like, this is the end times. This is Satan. This right. This is
Hmm.
so yeah. It was
It's weird to
so
me
I was
too.
really glad I wasn't there for the Trump stuff because that would have been oof.
It's weird that they would say like when their candidate of choice wins, that God wins.
Yeah,
But like, how do you deal with it then? It's almost like in that the Old Testament verse where, God is with all of his people conquering
right.
all these lands, but they can't conquer this one because they have iron chariots. And it's like, wait, what? God can't win because of iron chariots? And it's like, God can't win this election.
Yeah,
And it seemed to come out a lot too with with this most recent election of it's just it's a very cosmic battle behind the scenes. And even at some of the highest levels of the land, even the Supreme Court, you've got people who are completely committed to a mythological worldview, who believe that there are invisible angels and demons fighting these battles, and
mhm.
that they are there to obviously do God's bidding to beat these bad forces. And it's crazy to think about in this day and age that that's even a thing. But it's woven into some of the very highest levels of our society.
Yeah. And like when Trump's elected, it's like, well, God can use imperfect people to for his perfect plan is the thing that I heard my parents' friends saying at their church. But then if Biden's elected, it's like, oh no, it's either he cheated, um, which apparently God didn't see coming, or uh or yeah, Satan won. It's like they
Yeah,
try to have it both ways. Um, yeah.
it's crazy. It's funny. I saw Vice President Harris on, I think it was the inauguration day, was wearing purple, and they were bringing up some kind of verse where in Revelation where some bad character is wearing
Some
purple, and they were
harlot.
trying to, yeah, it's crazy what they do. But when you have people that grow up under Jim Dobson and Jerry Falwell and similar people, and this, like, to them, this is not like just a theoretical belief. This is their actual worldview,
Yeah.
and they see these power plays and they see themselves as needing to be involved and vocal. um, it gets to it. I know this is a side topic a little bit from your book, but did you feel like you were seeing, kind of the fringes of what people call Christian nationalism, the idea of
Oh
trying
yeah.
to take over for Christ?
Actually, this is in the book. I mentioned a few places
Okay.
when evangelicals 80% and then 85 the second time voted for Trump. I was not surprised because that was the vibe of not all the students, but definitely just overall the vibe of evangelical spaces of the middle 2000s to the present was just this angry, hateful, us versus them kind of thing where it stopped being. So when I make an observation in the book in 1998 when I first went to the campus for an interview, it was a very friendly place. Like I got out of my car and I was didn't know where to go, and there was this big group of white students um walking by, and I they all said hi to me, and I was like, do they think I'm someone else? Like, it was just super friendly. I went to a big public school. You don't just say hi to random strangers. And so they were like, oh, blessings on your day, and all this. And I was like, "Hey, do you guys know where the administration is?" And they point, and they all, they pointed, they walked me halfway there and made sure I got there. And they're super nice. This is good Christian kids, Within a few years, during the Bush years, that vibe, by and large, had disappeared. It was just like people were definitely wary and suspicious of outsiders, and the Fox News vibe had kind of taken hold, and you know, everything was out to get them. Everything they were afraid of everything and everyone that wasn't part of their bubble. Um, so yeah, the vibe shifted, and I realized I was seeing, kids who were part of the youth for Rush Limbaugh. Like he had like this club for kids and teens, and so did Bill O'Reilly. And so all these kids are like literally card carrying Fox News, Rush Limbaugh fans in my class who just hated me. Anything that I had to say that was contrary to what they thought, to them was a direct, and I wasn't even like proselytizing, as I mentioned before. I was just like, okay, well, here's this. Just the idea of even like considering a point of view to them was offensive and terrifying. And they sent angry emails to the president of the school to try and get me fired because, I dared to talk about racism. I dared to talk about someone's identity, just to talk about, not pushing any agendas, just to say this exists. So how do you as a Christian understand this? How does this interact with your faith? Nope, they did not come to the school to ask those questions. They came to just have all their views, reflected back on them. And so yeah,
Mm.
when Trump's elected, it's just like, oh yeah, we saw that, we've been seeing this for a while. Like when Obama was elected, we had a problem with swastikas. There was several in the first two or three episodes of my podcast, Chapel Probation, which started last year. One of the one of the people brought up this a swastika incident, and I misrepresented it because it was the wrong swastika incident. So the second person came on and said, "I heard your episode. You were talking about the wrong swastika." I'm like, "There was more than one?" And then someone else said, "Oh no, there was another one." So there were three swastika incidents where people were painting swastikas on black students' cars. There was a group of kids riding around with swastikas on their windows in their cars. There was all these things, and so like the hoods kind of came off when Obama got elected. So you can blame him. Thanks, Obama. You you gave license to the racist white nationalist Christians to just be loud and proud about who they were. Because
Mm.
before that, it was kind of known like, well, I probably shouldn't say this out loud. They would say it in close company, right? But after when Obama was elected, it was like all bets are off. It's we're scared, we're terrified, we're angry. We feel like we're being oppressed just because he exists, and so here we are. We're gonna bring Trump into the world.
Did you ever feel like personally threatened, either directly or indirectly, by the situation and by you even just asking these questions?
Oh yeah, I mean not physically, um, maybe not physically, but definitely, people would write to the school and say, I heard professor people, and usually it wasn't even my students. It was like friends of my students who would write to my boss, the chair of the English department, or the president of the school, who didn't read any of these. Um, I heard this Professor Okamoto was promoting the gay agenda and all I did was like assign a story by a gay writer, or I had gay characters in it, and we talked about it. That was a violation of their evangelical Christianity to even think about these things. Um, so I felt threatened I got called in to account for something I said or did pretty much every semester. Um, there was a nice little Pax Romana of like two or three semesters where nothing happened, and I was like, "Oh, I think I'm losing my edge." Um, but then I got called in for several things the next year. So, um,
Mm.
yeah, it's
It
weird.
There's a group out in Idaho called Christchurch. Have you heard of
Of
that
course,
group?
Idaho.
Doug
Yeah.
Wilson.
Yep.
Um,
Yep. Doug
and
Wilson. Yep.
his that group, they're kind of on my mind a lot because I've got loved ones that are neck deep in that garbage.
Oh
But
no.
the Doug Wilson's father, who's passed. Doug Wilson's the guy that's kind of in charge of the whole thing right now, and has been so for several decades. But his father had written a book about basically this is warfare. Like what we're doing, this
Yeah.
culture war is a war,
Yep.
and he had taken tactics from military warfare, ideas and put it into a social context. But I think it feels to me like one of the reasons that I have a platform for what I do is besides just sharing my own story and having other people share theirs, and as important and critical as that is in its own right, I think
It
it
is.
feels like it's one of those pivotal moments in history where maybe the threat isn't as big as we think it is or fear it could be, but they're organized, they're well funded, and they truly believe that they have the God of the universe behind
Yeah.
them, and that they need. And some of them, it's not just a culture war; it's literally an end times war, in that they believe
Yep.
that I believe it's going to be under the umbrella of post millennialism, but they
Mhm.
believe that if they can usher in the kingdom, that will literally, like, what they do will hasten Christ's return. In other words, Christ is it's not like he's got a timetable and he says on
Yeah.
this date, on on the year 2425, that's the year I'm coming. It's like
Yep.
God is waiting for his people to do
Yeah.
certain things, and if they do them, then he
Yeah.
will return, and those things include heavy proselytization and taking over the world for Christ.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus is waiting for his phone to ring. Um, he's waiting for that call. And yeah, and I can't stress enough that your if your audience hasn't already listened to Brad Onishi's Straight White American Jesus podcast, covers all of this every week. The
Hmm.
the rise of the white nationalism, and connects the dots between the various politicians in places like Idaho and Doug Wilson, um, and how these aren't just fringe religious fanatics anymore. These are people who are inserting themselves into our daily lives. They're inserting themselves into local governments as well as, state and national level. They literally have plans to infiltrate everything from the school boards to the city councils to all the way up into Congress and the Supreme Court, as we've seen. These are all like plans to take over the country for GOP white nationalist Jesus. This
Yeah.
this isn't the 70s born again Jesus anymore. This is this is authoritarian fascist Jesus. That they say they're against big government, but they want to take over the government and make big Jesus be the government. So
Yeah. And as a
um,
quick
I,
aside,
yeah.
when you bring in patriarchy with
Mm,
the quiverful movement, they
oof.
basically, a lot of them simply want to outbreed the pagans for Jesus. They
Yep.
want, so that
Exactly.
they can't outvote us maybe on everything today, but
Yep.
they believe they will be able to, just because they're going to outnumber us 10-1,
Yeah.
because they're going to all have, 6, 8, 10 kids or more, and they're all going to raise them as little soldiers for Jesus. And that's where it feels like, not to quote the Bible, in a positive sense, but the book of Esther, Mordecai talks about, with Esther, he's like, you are here for such a time as this. You're here to, to make a difference for this king. Esther was portrayed as like, this is your pivotal moment. Stand up, or bad things will happen. And taking a lesson from that, I kind of feel like this is a time to stand up. We don't know how bad the Christian nationalists could get, but if it got bad and we kind of foresaw it and didn't take action to mitigate it and speak up about it,
Yep.
shame on us. And that's where I feel like that's a small but important part of what is on my heart, to be honest.
Me too. There's this on Twitter and on all of social media, there's this deconstruction movement. And I wasn't gonna join because when I got out of faith in like 2004-ish, it was after the second election of Bush. I stayed at APU, Azusa Pacific, but I wasn't going to church anymore. I was just done. And then when I left Azusa, I was in 2013. That was it. I had already I write about in my book. I'd already sort of aligned myself with other communities and other friends and people. I didn't need anything from the church or from the church community anymore. And I lived a nice 5 or 6 years of incomplete bliss, not even thinking, very rarely thinking about any of this. But yeah, when Trump in 2016, it was like, oh, this is getting serious. And I know, kind of like you know, we've been in this. We are their worst enemies because we know how they think and we've been in those mindsets. So I felt obligated to come back to. I didn't want to. I kind of dragged myself kicking and screaming into this. Like, do I really want to? I'm so happy to not be thinking about this anymore. But I met people like Chrissy Stroop and Blake Chastain, who did the ex-evangelical hashtag, and Brad Onishi and Tori Williams Douglas, and so many other people who are fighting it out on Twitter and on their podcasts, and kind of reluctantly at first got into these conversations and in these fights against it all. And then yeah, here I am. It's like, yeah, we do need to speak up because the by and large America and the media still gives anyone who's a pastor a pass. You know, these are good people. These are the good Christian evangelicals who, you know, it's like even the Trump thing didn't swing it. Like they're still given the benefit of the doubt that these are good, you know, values voters as they're called. I don't think the it's starting the the alarm of has been sounded like, you know, maybe these people aren't okay. Maybe they don't have the best interests of this nation at heart. They are they have an agenda and it's gonna hurt a lot of people um who aren't white nationalist Christians.
Yeah.
So
It's
yeah, so we
interesting to see the paradox of like so many people leaving the church, and we see those, those reports and those charts. There are so many people exiting and becoming, nuns, as they say,
yeah,
and yet it's like a crisscross where people are leaving and the charts going down on this one side, but then people are also trying to fight harder, so their efforts are like reaching up further,
yeah,
and they're trying to outbreed us. And it's like it does seem like a clash is of ideas is basically it's already there. If you
yeah,
look for it, you can easily find it,
yeah,
but it feels like it's coming closer and closer to the forefront of the topics, and eventually I think it is going to be an issue that's, I mean, I don't want to be predictive because, who knows what's going to happen in the news and so forth. But I feel like it's going to become an issue that's eventually going to be talked about more and more.
yeah,
And people are going to be basically, I mean, if you mentioned at the beginning, being willing to stand up for Christ and, be a strong voice. It's like, if you really feel like at some point, this is your testimony, like Christ says, if you aren't willing to profess me before men, I won't profess you before the Father. And it's like, it's time to stand up and be counted, be a man, be a warrior, be a leader for Christ. And I know there are women involved in this too, but a lot of men, heavily on the patriarchy side, but
yeah,
men standing up and saying we have to do this for Christ and for our children, for our future, for everything that's of value to us. And I think eventually they're going to get empowered through, a few wins, win here, that, win this election, win that election, and they
yeah,
get enough of them under their belt. Roe v. Wade, case in point,
yeah,
and you get enough of these under your belts, and they're going to think, all right, this is our platform has finally arrived. It's time to get the amplifiers out, get our
yeah,
microphones out, and start putting this on blast. We've
yeah.
already been quietly in our churches talking about it, but it's time to get much more vocal, and that's
Oh yeah.
what's scary.
And it's happening, you know, in Congress, you can hear Marjorie Taylor Greene, you know, parroting whatever her pastor says. I don't know who that pastor is. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Lauren Boebert, Ted Cruz, you know, these are people using very specific language to white nationalism, to uh, to even the New Apostolic Reformation, which is this scary thing that started in the 80s that kind of got squashed a little bit recently, but they're not going away. They're just going to retool and adjust to. They're like the Borg in Star Trek. They're just going to keep adapting and coming back because they're, you know, they're on a mission. I do think there are some of the people who in these movements who aren't doing it in good faith and are just doing it for the power. Um, you know, there's some cynical players out there that just see this as a tool because it works, and they know they can get 30% of the country to vote for them or to vote a certain way, no matter what controversies or crimes are committed or um yeah, any political gaffes they make, because it's a guaranteed vote from these people. That's why 30%, right, will always vote for Trump no matter what. So we're fighting for that middle ground. 30% will never vote for Trump. I'm guessing these are approximations, but there's a chunk that won't vote for him. There's a chunk that will always vote for him. It's just those confused people in the middle that we're really trying to like get. And so it's a lot about money and power as much as it is about um, the belief systems.
Mm. Speaking of belief systems, I did want to get back a little bit to your story. As
Hmm.
you got to a point where you were realizing that you weren't a Christian, that this is, becoming no longer part of your worldview and you're shifting, um, in my experience, it was the expression of the idea that acknowledging this is mythology. Everyone's going to have a different way of kind of concluding it. For me, it was like, this is mythology. Because that was a lot of the Greco-Roman mystery cults were
Hmm.
big in my mind, compared to mythology. But how did you frame in your mind your escape from Christianity, and what were the kind of like how did you shift dealing with realizing your life will never be the same, and how did you deal with the afterlife, and how did you deal with the questions that were, I'm sure, coming at you at that point of where's your morality coming from if you don't have the Bible to guide you? Like, how did you
Yeah.
deal with some of the harder hurdles at that last juncture?
Yeah, that's one of the big issues that gets brought up when Christians address people who have left the faith, right? Like, what's to keep you from raping and murdering and stealing and and doing all, because they in the Christian mind, the only thing that is keeping you from being a depraved, megalomaniacal person is God and the Holy Spirit and Jesus. And short of that, you're just going to be a rapist. You're going to be a terrible human being. Um, Fortunately, going to college and reading people and reading other religions and reading, it's not that hard to have sort of a humanist view of, you know, an idea that human thriving and human flourishing is a right for everyone, and that my life is made better when my neighbors and my community are thriving with me. And I could cite a whole bunch of philosophy and writers and books, but really it just boils down to caring about the people around you and the people on this planet. I remember in the late like 2000s, like when the tsunami hit, um, but either Japan tsunami or the other one, but before that, I just remember it was like around New Year's, and I remember thinking I don't feel like celebrating because there's just at this moment there's so much suffering happening all the way on the other side of the planet. And it doesn't affect me in my day-to-day life, but just being mindful of that. And I wasn't a Christian anymore. I was like, why didn't I think of this when I was a Christian? We get as a Christian, I felt like you think you have the moral authority and you think you're on the right side of everything, the correct side of everything. But really, I was just, I don't, I was so self-absorbed with my faith and my witness and my, that I think I didn't have a view of humanity that I did after I left the faith. I just remember being sick to my stomach that there's children who are orphaned, there's people looking for loved ones in the mud of Southeast Asia. There's or in Japan, people's families swept away by the tsunami. And like when there's so much suffering, how can I, you know, just go crazy and like, woo, it's New Year's, yay. It's like, we do have to find that space of joy. We do have to find that place. So in answer to your question, I think I had a harder time finding joy and happiness because I felt more connected to humanity outside of faith. I felt
Mm,
more empathetic. Before people were like a
awesome.
puzzle to be solved, to be converted, to be witnessed to, it was like a transactional relationship I felt in my mind of my fellow humans. Without faith, I can just care about people because that's just a good thing to do.
Mm, that's
So
so
I've only
awesome.
murdered, 25 people. It's I got that under control. It's robbed a few banks, but you got out of your system. It's in the past.
Well, you mentioned just the caring about people and certainly being mindful about the horrific things, but you bring up to the or that brings up to the idea for me of just hell, the background of hell, which so many people do believe is real and is actual torture and conscious and forever. And you think, how can you enjoy anything
Yeah,
knowing that your loved ones and certainly your neighbors down the street, that some of them are dying and going into
yeah,
eternity lost, and it's forever and ever and ever with no recourse. It really boggles my mind that Christians can, like, I grew up in a family where football games were a big deal to watch, and I was personally never really into it. But
mm,
they would watch it. Sometimes they'd watch whatever it is, 2.5 hours of the one, and then take a little break, and next one. But we just spent 5 or 6 hours of our day with football as the big part of our day.
yeah,
And I was like, as I grew older, I thought, and this was while I was still a Christian, like, what if we use that time just to pray or to witness or to go learn more about apologetics? Like,
you have to.
why doesn't hell matter more to us? And it
Yeah,
definitely bothered me then. And it obviously bothers me now in a different sense, but, even as a deconverted person, pretty much next to nobody reached out to me when I was a Christian, when I was deconverting. And when I say next to nobody, I mean, like, at this point, several years into it, it's been like maybe two or three people that were dear to me that
yeah,
actually had any interest in talking about it. But the first year to 18 months, not a single person reached out. But it's like, if you really believe I'm about to burn in hell forever with no
yeah,
recourse, then why am I just like a write-off to you? And
yeah,
it really it helps solidify in my mind that there's this sense in which I wonder if you really believe this, because if you really did, if I was like in a burning house screaming, "Can you please bring that ladder over so I can get off, jump out the window and climb down the ladder?" They would be like, "Oh, of course I'll bring the ladder over. I'll help you jump out of that, burning house."
you hope.
But
Yeah,
they don't really do it practically, and it just makes you think.
it does. Yeah, yeah. Um,
Well, speaking of hell, how did you deal with the afterlife, and
yeah.
where
I
are
was,
you with the afterlife at this point?
yeah. I don't know. Even when I was a Christian, toward the end, some friends and I, we really researched what the Bible says about heaven. Almost nothing. And what the Bible says about hell. Again, almost nothing. All those, the visions that we have of heaven and hell can be traced back to the filmmaker DeMille, right? The early films of heaven with the liars and the clouds and the angels and the devil with the pitchfork and the fire all around. That's the American evangelicals' vision of heaven and hell, and it's not in the Bible. Those descriptions are not in the Bible. It's very vague descriptions of yeah, it's almost nothing. Just say that. Um, and so even when I was a Christian, it was not super clear what the afterlife was. I remember when I was a kid, there was a controversial sermon by, you mentioned Paul Cedar at Lake Avenue, who was a fishing buddy of my dad's. Um, Gave a sermon about, like, what do you do when you die? Should you be cremated? Because how, if you're cremated and you're just a bunch of dust in an urn, how will you be called up? Your body be resurrected to go to heaven? And he went through so many intellectual hoops to just get to the point where it's okay to be cremated. God will figure it out. Whether whether he rehydrates and reanimates the dust into a body it's just this long thing. And I was like, man, he asked a good question, but then none of his response was actually a biblically based. It was just like, look, there's already, millions, if not billions of people who've been cremated. There's no way God would let all those believers not ascend into heaven. He's going to give you a new body. That's mentioned in somewhere. And it's sort of like cobbling verses from all throughout the Bible just to make people feel okay that they got cremated or they're gonna be cremated. You don't have to be buried. And even if you aren't cremated, your body kind of just deteriorates into, worm feed anyway. So all these things were just not clear to me, even when I was a Christian. And in my mind as a Christian, I was like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm a Christian, I'm saved. Whatever form the afterlife is, it's going to be good. Fine. Um, but yeah, that's the biggest fear, right? When you deconstruct and when you leave the faith, well, am I not going to go to heaven? But I don't know. I'm okay with just not knowing, just ceasing to exist. I've had a couple of surgeries on my eye when I was a kid, and I've had oral surgery. And when you get knocked out, I don't know if you've ever had, general anesthesia.
Yeah.
You just sort of cease to exist for however long, and then you wake up, and then but where were you in that hour or 2 hours when you were under? Because they put you so far under, you're not even dreaming, right? It's just you're just not you don't exist for that amount of time. Um, that doesn't seem like a bad thing. You just, I don't know. Maybe that I'm agnostic in the sense that I'm willing to consider the idea that there's something after death. I don't know. We have no way of knowing. There's um outside of the Bible and other religious texts, there's really no account for what happens. Um, and so to
Mm.
me, it just reinforces this idea that, okay, you got this one life that you do know about, however long that is. What are you going to do? Are you going to try and leave this world a better place? Are you going to try and be a positive influence and effect on the people around you? Are you going to try and help other people, get to a place of human thriving and flourishing? Um, that to me feels like a noble way to spend however many minutes or hours that we have on this planet. Um, much more than just the group think and the in-group, out-group mentality of today's Christianity. So yeah,
Mm.
I guess
If
all that to say, I don't know.
if you when you were looking back at it as a Christian, did you want to live forever at that time?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's a funny podcast called the Dirty Rotten Church Kids. The very very funny deconstruction podcast, and they did a whole episode about how heaven sounds kind of awful. It sounds like they describe it as like a worship service forever. Is there pizza? Is there beer? Is there sex? Is there all these things that we love on earth? They aren't described in the Bible. It's just we're just worshiping God for eternity, and even as a kid, I remember thinking like, yes, that doesn't sound that great. But I'm a mortal uh soul that just can't grasp how awesome that is. So I'm just gonna trust that that's gonna be awesome for eternity. Um, and then you look at people like Ted Cruz that are gonna be in heaven. And it's like, do I want to be in eternity with people like that? With Marjorie Taylor Greene? Like, no, I don't think I do. It's I'm okay with going someplace else if they're not gonna be there because
Yeah.
damn, that's a long time to spend with you know not cool people. That's,
Yeah, I hear you. It definitely, I've heard people say similar things about it. It doesn't sound fun or it just sounds like it's going to eventually be boring. You might be able to entertain yourself or feel happy for 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 years, but like eternity is forever. You will eventually get bored. I know people say that, and I understand what they mean by it.
yeah,
I still struggle with it. I wanted to live forever, and heaven sounded glorious to me. It sounded
yeah,
wonderful, and it still hurts a little bit sometimes. It is like that's not part of me. Like I don't. Whenever my time is up, I don't want to go. I don't want to be done. I don't
yeah.
want to be done for a
With
long
this
time.
life,
Yeah,
um, because we only have this reference point, right, of this life. Now, like if you or I had been born in a war-torn country and lived a life of complete suffering, death would be a release. So we
yeah,
have this privilege of being born where we're born into the situation and conditions that we're born into to have a life that we will miss. So we have this,
true.
we have the privilege to imagine amazing things. I have family, I have friends, I have an iPhone sitting here. It's like got all this stuff around me that, makes up who I am. Whereas if I was born, somewhere else, my parents could be executed in front of my eyes and I could be sent to a camp of and tortured and humiliated my whole life and just die. And that person would have a very different view of death and heaven and hell and things like that.
Yeah,
So
I've sometimes wondered on that note how people in North Korea see those kind of things.
Yeah.
I'm sure some
Yeah.
of that is different because the entire worldview structure is different, but
Right.
I wonder how they see some of that. I I do want to ask just a couple more questions too, and also give you a chance to share anything that's on your heart from your book that we're not touching on. But
Mm.
um, the whole idea of marriage in this for a lot of people, if you're married and you're both on the same page, and then one of you deconstructs either way, it can really hurt the other person. Were
Yeah.
you already deconstructing before you got married, or was that after? How
Yeah.
did that play out?
Yeah, I'm lucky. I found a life partner who we were both Christians when we met and got married. But like one of the first things we did as a dating couple in college was like, what do we do with our gay friends? We love our gay friends. What does the Bible say? And we literally sat down for a few weeks. This is some Christian cred, right? This is like we got our Bibles and we got our concordance and our dictionaries and our references and traced every mention of homosexuality in the Bible and wrote out our own notes and study on it. All to conclude that the Bible is not conclusive, other than a couple of clobber verses, which can be, dissected as far as like the vocabulary and the meaning of the words, which aren't clear. Um, you know, so we were already kind of in a mindset of, as a couple, of, well, we're gonna figure this out together. Wherever that takes us is okay. And so at first it took us to church and it took us to Bible study and it took us to a lot of, typical Christian evangelical places. Um, but as each, and I think I deconstructed quicker than she did, my wife Jerry. Um, we ended up in an Episcopalian church at the end, which is often the last stop for former evangelicals. It's your last effort to find something. And I liked, there's a really liberal Episcopalian church here in Pasadena called All Saints. It's a wonderful place. We call it NPR Church. It's like all of the sort of liberal intellectual versions, completely affirming, social justice oriented church. At the end of the day, I was like, I'd kind of rather just be home drinking coffee and reading the sports page. Because I don't, it got to the point where like they're just reflecting what I think, and so like I don't kind of don't need this anymore. And so my wife hung on for a little longer, but we were basically on the same path, just maybe at different speeds. And so that, yeah, we're very fortunate because I know people personally who have gotten divorced or broken up with their partner, because they couldn't reconcile that difference of faith. I mean, even changing denominations can be, or going to Catholic or back and forth between those two, Catholic and
Yeah.
Protestant, can be really stressful in a relationship. So yeah, just another version of privilege that I have, that I have a life partner that has deconstructed basically alongside me.
Mm, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm more in the other category where it is to this very day a massive issue, and the resolution is definitely not clear, but it's heartbreaking because it's
It
like
is.
it's
Mm.
so needless. Like people literally throwing great what otherwise could probably be great relationships away over mythology. And I've said this before, and I don't want to sidetrack us, but just to say it
Yeah.
here, they they love Jesus more than they love you. They have to. Their book requires it. And at the end of the day, until they can realize, number one, that they really are more in love with a mythological,
Yeah.
literary, fictive character than with the person in front of them, it's just there's not really a good chance for it to get better. I mean, the Bible's really clear. You have to be willing to um, follow Christ and deny, give up houses, parents, children, spouses,
Yeah.
anything. If Christ says, "Follow me and be a fisher of men," you do
Yeah.
it. And it's like, but they also, we're kind of groomed for it in the sense of like we're told, you can't have a good marriage unless it's, you and your spouse and God together. You're like
Yeah.
this cord of three strands is not easily broken. And if
Yep.
you don't have Christ at the center, then
Yeah.
you basically have nothing. You're as good as the pagans.
Yeah.
And so when you have someone who is clearly saying, I'm not just like not concerned about Christ, I'm actually vocally saying this is psychologically abusive to children and this is wrong and this is mythology, you're now
Yeah.
like you're enemy number one. You might as well just be the devil, and they can't take it. It's extremely threatening.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry you're going through that, man, because that is so hard. It's heartbreaking. It's and I see it all the time. And and to your point, it doesn't need to be this way, you know. Not
Mm,
not all Christians have that kind of faith.
yeah.
Um, there are many options for Christianity, and yeah. Oh,
I think especially the progressive Christians, just in my
mhm,
experience, they seem to have a better shot at
yeah,
keeping, that tension of, yeah, well, there's questions, and I'm deconstructing certain things too. And
yeah,
maybe some women can be elders in the church but not preaching pastors, or maybe sometimes they can. And
yeah,
they're kind of deconstructing gender roles a little bit and complementarianism. So they're kind of already in that a little bit, and maybe they're kind of touching on reading articles about maybe hell isn't truly torture. Maybe it's more just like C.S. Lewis's version of you just kind of shrink in on yourself and become your own personal hell. So they're kind of doing it. But when you're into like ultra fundamentalist inerrancy kind of stuff, 6 day creationism, the earth is, 6 to 10,000 years old,
yeah.
you know, that stuff, you can't, they can't entertain you at that point.
Nah, something big has to shift, or something has to happen that jogs something loose. Because it's an
Mm.
interesting thing, because they instinctively know that if you pull one strand of the tapestry, it all falls apart. So they have to make these very solid borders around this tapestry that can't be penetrated, basically. I tell a story in the book about a kid who, when confronted with just a minor discrepancy in the Bible, just spiraled and never made it back. It was really heartbreaking to see. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, and it's good in the sense of they're deconstructing, but it is amazing. And I think when you're very sheltered and you're kind of told there are no issues, it's like Wizard of Oz. There, don't look behind the curtain. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. And then you realize actually there is something there.
Yeah.
It does, it shakes you up. And I think that, I'm sure you've heard this before, but it seems like that pendulum dynamic is very prevalent, where like the more fundamentalist you were going through it as a
Yeah.
Christian, the harder it hits, but the more often, the more vocal you are when you leave, because you're like, this wasn't just like a little white lie. This was such intense and overwhelming bullshit that literally ruined decades of my life. I
Yeah.
have to help people. It's like I'm in prison and I had the key the whole time, and I finally realized it. I got out, but I
Yeah.
know there's other prisoners in that prison who also have a key in their hands, but they don't know that they can get out. I can't just walk away. It'd be like someone, escaping North Korea and saying, I know my parents don't have much food. I know they're kind of tortured, but I don't give a shit. It's like,
Yeah.
I don't care that they're there going through it. I'm free. It's like, no, you care deeply about the people that are still imprisoned.
Yeah.
And it definitely is true in my experience. You got to speak up, because this stuff that ruins people's lives.
Yeah. It's like the allegory of the cave, right?
Yeah.
You get out of the cave, and to them the light is terrible. Um and they will they will harm you for introducing that light to them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, can I ask, and I do want to again in a second ask you to bring us back to your book, but kind of my last question for just the way I do interviews, kids.
yeah.
We talked about indoctrination a little bit. How does your how were you? I mean, ask this: how were you going to raise your kids if you had been a Christian still, and how is it different now?
I was gonna raise, when I had our first kid, I was deconstructing. Had our second kid, I was even more deconstructing. By the third kid, I was pretty much not a Christian anymore. But so the first two, we sent them to Sunday school because I thought, well, it's a nice activity. It's inoffensive when they're little. To my kids' credit, they hated Sunday school. They never wanted to go. Um,
That's awesome.
they just they just hated it. They hated the other. They said the other kids were kind of mean and entitled and disrespectful of the Sunday school teachers, and
Hmm.
um,
That's
they thought
unfortunate.
the teachings were very trite. And so when we stopped going to church, they were so happy. Um, and it's tough because my parents are always trying to tell them Bible stories when they were growing up, and so my kids know about it. And I never like I don't think I didn't intentionally raise them to hate church. Um, it was probably subconscious though, because I'd never really liked going to church. I liked being a Christian and I liked doing activities and playing music. And there were so many things I liked about church, but sitting and listening to a sermon to me was like the worst thing. The English major and then eventually English professor in me was always like finding holes in their logic and in their arguments and the way they broke down Bible verses. And um, so again, very fortunate. Like it when we said we're not going to church anymore, there was great rejoicing in our household. Um,
Hmm, that's awesome.
yeah. So and my kids are pretty agnostic like me. They're always they sometimes like to joke with me that they're going to become a Christian to rebel against us.
That's awesome. I like to tell my kids a lot, just the idea that they don't have to believe like daddy. Like what
Mm,
we do a practice thing for autonomy's sake, where I'll say pretend you have a bubble around your head, and it's I call it your worldview bubble,
mm,
and I'll say I'm going to push my hand in and tell you you must believe like me, and I say you get to push back and push my hand. No, get out of my worldview bubble. And I'll say you have to believe like daddy. No, I don't. You have to believe like mommy. No, I don't. You have to believe like this church. No, I don't. And then we'll practice and say who has the power over what you believe. And say I do. Who gets to decide what you believe and how you live your life? I do. And I think it's empowering. I think it's very simplistic, but they get it. But they
yeah.
also get this sense that there are people that do actually, even though it's kind of a joke, they do, not a joke, but it's fun.
Yeah.
But they do get the sense, I think, that there are people that really do want to get in there and
Yep.
force you to believe like them. And I think I've been trying to be very clear to them. You don't have to be an atheist. And I mean, if they choose to be a Christian, obviously I'm going to have some very serious discussions with them about, why do you believe that? Why do you
Sure.
think it's real? But I said, I'll love you the same no matter what you believe. And the interesting difference is the Christians they can't say that.
Right.
They cannot say if you want to be an atheist, that's fine.
Well,
It's
they
okay.
could say that, but they tend not to.
I mean, in their perspective of like, you're okay with
Yeah.
ultimate reality.
Yeah.
You're at that point in their minds at war with the God character.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, depending on which kind of Christian they are, but yeah, the fundamentalists aren't going to, yeah, it's not going to work.
Mm. Well, I know your book is the big event of the day, so I did want to kind of ask you to wrap us up by telling anything else from the book or
Yeah.
giving any kind of plug that you can for it that we may have not touched on yet.
Yeah. This has been great. You pretty much everything we talked about is part of what this book is. Whether it's because it's not a deconstruction book. It's not like a step by step of how I deconstructed. There's parts of that. It's also a kind of a criticism of evangelical higher education, which I kind of think is a joke. I mean, like I said, you can get a good education if you're fortunate enough to have the right schedule and the right professors at any of these schools. Um, but eh, it's a rough go, and it's kind of a gamble. Whereas if you go to a state school, any education's a gamble. You can have crappy professors, and there are a lot of them out there. Um, Having worked at every level of education, there's good teachers and bad teachers everywhere. But yeah, it's evangelical schools. It's like even when I was there, we would have discussions in the faculty of like how this is an impossible situation. They're trying to be on one hand evangelical with all the values and beliefs in there and be a top-notch academic institution, and the two don't go together. There's so much in academics that are contrary to evangelical belief that they were going to a head, and something was going to have to give, and it wasn't going to be evangelicalism. So yeah, they've since taken a pretty hard turn to the right, um where I taught, and among other schools too. You mentioned Bob Jones. My best episode of my podcast, Chapel Probation, was the Bob Jones episode. So if you're only going to listen to one Chapel Probation, that's the one. It's a guy named Nate Nakow, who's a friend of mine who went to Bob Jones.
Mm.
Um, so the book is about the religious sort of critique of religion and the culture, and then equal parts that and sort of the formation of my own identity. So it's a weird thing to call yourself an ex-evangelical because you're identifying as something you're not anymore. It's like, um, so it was important to me while going through that process that I developed it. Who am I and what are my values? To your earlier point. Um, and so I found a community here in Los Angeles, largely BIPOC, but it's very diverse, of artists and activists that called the Tuesday Night Cafe, and all my chosen family friends are from this community or attached to this community, musicians, actors, writers, and they became my church. They became my people. And so when I left Faith and when I left APU, I didn't have that sense of dread or emptiness or loneliness. I had already sort of seeded a whole nother life to escape into when I left. And so this it's sort of like not like a how-to, but it's an inspiration that you can find your people, you can find your values, you can find who you are outside of Christianity, with just digging into who you are and what you're about and your interests and your beliefs and your own values, and you'll find people. And so, but I hate when TV and movies talk about like celebrities and stuff. But it just so happened that if some of the people in my community became celebrities, and um, so I have this image, like I had a 40th birthday party. It's the sort of like the peak of the book before it starts to get sad. Um, the my friend Keiko Agana, who was in Gilmore Girls, was playing drums. We had a jam session. The singer for a band called Sugar Cult was playing guitar and singing, and my friend, who's a session player for like every single pop star in the world, was playing bass. And one of the leaders of the Tuesday Night Cafe is also in this picture. And to me, that was just like this moment where, wow, this is my life now. There's not a single person from church and evangelical culture in this picture. It's extreme because these people are really cool. They're way cooler than I am. Um, but it's just like, wow, how far I've come to get to this point. And then shortly after that, they're gonna fire me, and I quit. And that's all in the book. It's a happy sad ending because like I needed to leave, but I didn't want to leave because I was helping the Asian club get going, and I was helping the underground LGBTQIA club get going, and not get kicked out of school. And so yeah, all of this is sort of wrapped up into this narrative of this little chunk of my life, 15 years of my life, that that was pretty foundational to who I am today.
Mm. It's amazing too when you do something like what you've done with your book, when you really dig into the nitty-gritty details of the stories and kind of go down the rabbit trails and talk about, and that reminds me of this and then that.
Yeah.
When you really get a chance to do it, in my experience, it's very cathartic. I mean, it's very overwhelming at times and very painful. And I'm working on several future presentations and monologues that I'll be doing with my story that are, it literally
Yeah.
brings tears to my eyes just to work on it privately on my own, in the Word document. But
Mm.
it's like you need to kind of unwind what happened and process it.
Yeah.
And it ends up becoming, that becomes part of your journey is the actual, not just the leaving, but processing what happened. And like you said, who am I now? And then I think it helps you too to see the red flags, to say, what was I doing before that I wasn't, why was I not seeing this? And that was one of the biggest issues in my journey was, why was I not concerned about the genocide stories in the Old Testament? Why was I not concerned about slavery and child brides? This stuff should have been red flags, and it wasn't. Why wasn't it? And I don't know if it's the exact perfect word to use, but that Stockholm syndrome of, I loved my captor. Why did I love my captor? Why
Yeah.
was I okay with that, with the Yahweh character? And I think when you sit back and you say, yeah, people lied to me, people held information from me, some people hurt me, but I am also reflecting on just my, like, what part did I play in it? Because I tried for a while to be part of the system, and I tried to proselytize. I preached in soup kitchens and churches and youth groups and street corners in Philadelphia. Like, I was part of this too.
Yeah.
And it makes you think, how do I heal from it? Yes, but what things am I still doing in my worldview where I'm not truly, like, I haven't actually escaped all of this? Because I think some of the red flags are still there, And sometimes even just that pendulum experience, sometimes we tend to see it all as black and white. So it's like, if Christianity's garbage, then, if I think if it's not true, then all of it's garbage.
Yeah.
And there's this tendency to see it in black and white that I'm still struggling with, to say, no, there's gray areas in so many of these conversations, and to realize you might be out of Christianity, but you're still deconstructing some of that stuff. You're deconstructing yourself in some ways. And I think it's great that you did it. I would like to, at some point down the line, follow in your footsteps and do the same thing, because it helps. It really does help, and it obviously helps. Once you helping yourself, you're also helping other people who need to put their journey into words too.
I hope so. I think, yeah, that's one of the main reasons I wanted to write this book, was because I see online, there's a Facebook group for ex-evangelicals. There's a few of them that I'm in, and there's so much despair and loneliness and loss of sense of purpose and self, when
Hmm.
it must be like my deconstruction was a long, you know, 10-15 year process to the point where I got out. But there are people who just jolt upright in church one day and realize, oh crap, I don't believe this anymore, or this is toxic. Oh my gosh, why haven't I seen this before? And their whole lives are tied up in these communities, and so for them to get to handle that all at once must be it must be absolutely terrifying. Um, and
It is.
yeah, uh, yeah, and so just the idea that there's a way out, there's other lives to be lived, and there's a wonderful wide world out there where you can find your people. That has to be part of the message. And we were talking about the battle that we're fighting against Christian nationalism and all this fundamental belief. Part of it is just giving the assurance that there's more out there, because we're told that there's nothing out there. It's darkness, and it's evil, and it's dangerous. And there is that out there. Let's be real. But there's your people are out there too, and there's goodness, and there's hope that we can make this world a better place for everyone, not just for these select in groups. And that's why I think we do this. I think that's why you have this channel, and that's why me and my friends in my community work to do, and we create the art that we create, and we create and participate in the conversations that we participate in, and just hope and even pray for the best for everyone around us. And so
Hmm.
that's where I hope we can bring people to.
Yeah, and I'll just wrap up by saying too, I really appreciate how much you express a sensitivity and an awareness for people that are being oppressed. It comes out in several different contexts in your book, but you're obviously putting out there's people that are realizing they're not part of the mainstream group, whether it's because of gender, a gender topic, or a race topic, whatever it is, and they're never feeling at home there. And it's so important. And I feel like I'm just I feel like it's hitting in waves of realizing the ways that I'm not even aware myself of some of the pain that's out there, and to say, start to become more aware and more sensitive, and be, even if it's not your journey, be there as a helper. And I appreciate that you bring that issue up so many ways and from so many angles, because there are people hurting, and a lot of this stuff is not just is Christianity mythology. Yes, it is. Okay, let's leave. It's like, yeah, but there's people that are wounded. They're not as concerned about where Christianity came from and where the mythology is copied from. They want to know, do you love me? Do you care about me? Do you care about the fact that I feel like I'm dying inside and I don't really care to live another day? Do you
Yeah.
actually care about me? Am I important? And it's
Yeah.
that I think I'm just starting to realize in certain aspects of my life how critical it is. This is not an academic thing. This is a deeply emotional thing, and people need hope. They need a sense that their lives have meaning, and that we're going to be there in that journey. So thank you for bringing that to our
Absolutely.
forefront of our attention.
Yeah, no, that's well said. We're on the same side here. So I'm really honored to be in this conversation with you and to meet you. And yeah, I just encourage you to keep doing what you're doing, because it's so important. Yeah.
Mm. Likewise. Well, everyone, we've been speaking with Scott Okamoto. Thank you so much, Scott. Everyone, please check out the link for the book. Check out the link for his website and his blog. Please go like and subscribe. I've heard he's possibly starting a TikTok soon, and once I get that link, I'll have that there. If he does add a YouTube channel, we'll add that. So, check in later, see if it's there. But Scott, we love your voice in this, and we love the fact that you are bringing so many good insights to the to our attention. And thank you for being willing to be a vocal voice in this.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.